Alright, hello and welcome to another Why Would You Use. So, today we're going to be talking about the Vaykor Sydon. I think this might be my favorite of the Syndicate melee weapons, just because this weapon is really unique and has, like, two unique abilities on it, as opposed to just one. And they're ones that I can appreciate, because this weapon isn't, like, amazing, it's just very different. So, this is what I'm running on it. This is kind of basic, and obviously, as I've said in the past, you can replace Lifestrike on frames that don't need it and make this weapon much, much better. But for this weapon, I know that a lot of people are using it with Blood Rush because that is technically viable with the 15% critical chance. But for me personally, I prefer having Weeping Wounds and having more of a focus on status, because what I'm using this weapon for isn't like long runs. I'm using this weapon for more tech stuff, so stripping armor and using its special abilities is kind of why I have this weapon around. For longer runs, there are definitely better weapons with better stances that do more damage, that have an easier time comboing. There are weapons that outclass this easily in that regard, but the stuff that this weapon has going for it is that it has an inherent, I believe, 50% chance to completely negate any like movement crowd control, which is knockdowns and knockbacks and things like that. So you have that, which is nice, and if you were to use the mod Sure-Footed on your Warframe, you completely negate all of that stuff automatically, which is really powerful. You can also use a combination of Power Drift and Fortitude, I believe it is, but that's 2 mod cards, which is going to be a lot to ask for a lot of builds. But possibly teching in just Sure-Footed, I think is pretty reasonable and is decent for some Warframes that just never ever want to get knocked down. And the other thing this weapon has going for it is that if you block any 15 hits, you get a blind. And the blind is modified by Primed Reach, which is why that's on this weapon. And this weapon is also just decently long in its own right anyway. So you block those 15 hits and you get about a little, I don't know the exact value, but it's over 30 meters of a stun, a blind, that goes through walls. And that sets this weapon up for finishers and makes it a really good tool. And of course, because this is a polearm, it has the maximum blocking value of 85%, which is pretty solid. So there's not a whole lot really to go into this weapon other than it has solid damage. It's got really good abilities, it's got a nice passive, it's got a really good kind of activated passive, although I wish it worked a little differently, which we'll talk about a little bit whenever I'm actually using it. But let's just get started. So the thing about this weapon is that you have to have 15 continuous blocked hits to actually use its ability, its blind. Which is really unfortunate, because that is not the preferred way to do so. It would be preferable if you could block 15 hits at any time, and then once you're at 15, you could release it for the burst. But that is unfortunately not how it works. And you can see there I went in for the finisher on the bombards. Unfortunately, these guys were not dead yet, so it's rough for me to do that. 15 hits, blind through walls. So you can take out tough units that way. It's actually really simple for this weapon, and because you have the blind and because it goes through walls at such a high rate, it's really techy and easy to use. And I actually would probably suggest Lifestrike on this kind of no matter what, and because most Warframes up to a pretty solid level, if you have any kind of survivability whatsoever, can take 15 hits of 85% damage reduction. It's just solid. It's just a solid weapon, and like I said, with Sure-Footed, you have no chance of being knocked down. It's a very defensive weapon. Like, if you want even more ridiculous survivability on, like, a Chroma, this weapon performs really well. And it opens Chroma up to having a lot of finishers that he wouldn't otherwise have. And this weapon is reasonably powerful for finishers and stuff. But yeah, that's the Vaykor Sydon. It's like a really laid-back weapon, I would say, because you play a lot more passively. I will say, though, that the preference I would have, and I think it would make this weapon a lot more valuable, is if you could block any 15 hits and you would just charge up to that 15 state, and then you could hit alt fire to actually activate the blind. I think this weapon would be a lot better. And it is, of course, as I've said before, kind of sad that it doesn't have the Syndicate proc, but whatever. It it works really well. And of course, as I said, it's got solid damage. There's no big damage mods on here or anything, and you could see it was doing some good damage to those enemies. Clearing just random trash enemies is easy. Utilizing your blind to clear out any tough mobs is really powerful. So yeah, that's the Vaykor Sydon. This is like just a really chill weapon that just does work. And actually utilizes blind in a unique way, which is what I hope we're going to see with shields when they change. But yeah, that's the Vaykor Sydon, and I'll see you guys tomorrow.